Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, Governor Rauner is joined by his Transportation Secretary and others as they discuss a partnership between the state and private enterprise to construct a bridge in Joliet that will increase commercial traffic throughout the state, helping to attract and expand businesses in Illinois. Then in about 20 minutes from now, we sit down with Alan Manning, author of Father Lincoln, the untold story of Abraham Lincoln and his boys. Manning describes Lincoln's relationship with his children and how being a father affected his presidency. And finally, in about 1 hour from now, we head to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, where former U.S. Senator Adlai Stevenson discusses his book, The Black Book, American Politics and History as Experienced by 5 Generations of an American Family, as well as U.S. and Illinois politics. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our Advisory Council members.
Hi, I'm Linda Brookhart, Executive Director of the State Universities Annuitants Association. Founded in 1971, the State Universities Annuitants Association is the only advocacy organization focusing solely on pension and health care benefits for the participants and beneficiaries within the state university's retirement system. We advocate for both active workers as well as retirees. The number of individuals are well over 200,000. As an association, we work hard to keep our members informed of possible changes in the law that may impact their pensions, their health care, and their general well-being. There is no other association working to keep individuals informed on issues that matter. This is the one reason we're also proud to support the work of the Illinois Channel. Its focus is to keep all Illinoisans informed of the issues that affect them, whether in state government or of significant changes in the private sector. The Illinois Channel's in-depth, unedited coverage of legislative events, policy discussions, interviews with lawmakers, university presidents, and business leaders keep you informed on the issues that affect your life and the future of Illinois. I'm Linda Brookhart with the State Universities Annuitants Association. I watch the Illinois Channel, and I hope you do too. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Joliet, Governor Rauner is joined by his Transportation Secretary and others as they discuss a partnership between the state and private enterprise to construct a bridge in Joliet that will increase commercial traffic throughout the state, helping to attract and expand businesses in Illinois. This runs about 20 minutes.
Good afternoon. I'm Illinois Transportation Secretary Randy Blankenhorn, and I'm truly honored to be here today. Joining us, we have a bit of a who's who in Will County, and I want to thank Leader Durkin and members of the General Assembly for being with us, many of our Will County board members, and a number of our Joliet aldermen. Thank you all for coming. Today would not be possible without the leadership of someone who truly understands and values what investing in infrastructure and what its importance to Will County and the state's economy are. Every time he says that he wants to spend more and more money on infrastructure, billions and billions of dollars, it makes me smile. And with no further ado, to talk about what we're here to announce here today, ladies and gentlemen, Governor Bruce Rauner.
Thank you very much, everybody. This is an exciting day, very exciting. It's an honor to be here. You know what? This is moving Illinois' economy forward. Illinois is the transportation hub of America. Will County is the transportation hub of Illinois. And we are all about growing jobs in Illinois, high-paying, high-quality jobs that are great careers for everybody. Transportation and transportation infrastructure is the foundation of doing that. And you know, we've got a lot of challenges in Illinois. We all know it. We read about them every day. We're trying to fix them. Every challenge we have will be overcome through more economic growth, through more jobs, more economic development, more economic empowerment. That's the answer to every one of our challenges. Today, we're about to announce a major step forward in growing jobs and enhancing the infrastructure here in Will County. Now, we've all been talking for years. We got a lot of traffic congestion on I-80, a lot of traffic congestion on I-55, and we've got the opportunity to dramatically grow our intermodal facilities here. We are the crossroads for America for rail, for highways and trucks, for waterway freight, as well as air. Right here in Will County is where all this comes together. And today, we're going to move this project forward. Now, we've had a lot of discussions, different options on the table, various things. The idea we're going to announce today, this has been discussed for years, hasn't been acted on. Time for action is now. We've worked for the last 18 months in our administration to try to leverage taxpayer money to get more private money to grow our economy. Get the maximum benefit, the maximum impact for our taxpayer dollars. That's what we're announcing today. Here today, we're announcing a joint venture, joint effort between the state of Illinois, the city of Joliet, the county of Will, along with CenterPoint Properties and the private sector to enhance the infrastructure here and dramatically raise the opportunity for more economic growth and more jobs. The state of Illinois is committing today to expand and improve the interchange at Hobalt Road, coming off of I-80, and it widened Hobalt Road coming south into this development here. And CenterPoint Properties is committing to invest somewhere, it's going to be probably about $170 million, 150 to 170 million dollars, private investment, no taxpayer money, to extend Hobalt Road coming south into this development and put a bridge over the Des Plaines River. Private bridge with a toll. They could privately manage, no taxpayer money, but provide quicker access coming off of I-80 and get rid of the traffic nightmare that's coming on 80, 53, 55, and blocking progress here. Huge development. And taxpayers leverage. We in Illinois, we're going to need to improve that interchange anyway. Now we can do it in a partnership, move up the time frame, and do it in conjunction with CenterPoint Properties, putting a private bridge over that can really expand the capacity here. Get more companies coming who want to build out warehouses, more companies who want to use our freight system, use our highways, employ the hardworking people of Illinois. Very, very exciting development. Massive leverage on hardworking taxpayer money in Illinois. $21 million, leveraged into $200 million of infrastructure improvement, more construction jobs to build it out, but long-term permanent jobs here in this fantastic intermodal facility. This is the largest inland port in North America, right here in Will County. And we're going to enhance it, make it even bigger, even stronger, drive more high-paying jobs. Very excited. With that, to talk more about the detail, I'll turn it back to Transportation Director Randy Blankenhorn.
Thank you, Governor. As he pointed out, this is not a new concept. This is an idea that had been around for many, many years. And as we started to put this thing together late last week, I looked at my calendar, and it was July 1st of last year that I sat down with members of CenterPoint's team, Will County, and the city of Joliet to talk about how we might come together with a public-private relationship to build something new to improve our infrastructure. A year later, we have an agreement. For those of you in the private sector, that sounds like a long time. In the public sector, that's light speed. To really bring, and I want to thank the city, I want to thank the county, and I want to thank our partners in the private sector, CenterPoint. It takes a lot of work to get to this point. The governor's correct in saying that this is a winner for everybody. What we're doing is essentially building a new connection, a new northern access point to Will County's intermodal facilities. We're going to build a diverging diamond interchange, and for those of you that haven't seen one yet, it's a new engineering philosophy about how we make interchanges work better. We've got one at I-88 and Illinois 59 up in Naperville, and we've got another one down in southern Illinois and Marion. This will be the third one that we build. It's more efficient, it's safer, and we're going to be able to move things faster. It's much more efficient traffic operations. While the interchange is the focal point, there will also be a new 4-lane road connecting I-80 to CenterPoint's operations via Hobart Road, a direct route from I-80 for trucks entering and leaving the facility. About 11,000 vehicles a day would use it today, including 6,600 trucks. By the year 2040, we anticipate that it will grow to 30,000 vehicles a day and 18,000 trucks. Any of you that live and work in Will County will understand how welcome this is to try to improve the truck traffic along your roads, along our state highways, and give more direct access and them out of your communities and directly into the intermodal facilities. We've heard loud and clear that how the local communities, that local roads, state roads cannot continue to shoulder the burden. We had to find a solution that mitigates local issues while providing better access, better opportunities, and a better future for our freight and logistics businesses. Businesses and commuters that rely on that operating safety aren't the only ones to benefit. The Medewan Tallgrass Prairie and the Abraham Lincoln National Cemetery, two jewels of this state, can start to rest easy knowing that some relief to their traffic concerns is on the way. Because of the governor's leadership and by everyone working together, we have arrived at a good solution for everybody for a local, regional, and state transportation problem. To talk more about the local benefits, I'd like to start by introducing Larry Walsh, County Executive, Will County. Larry?
Well, thank you, Randy. Thank you very, very much. Welcome everyone to Will County this morning for a great show here in an announcement. First off, I want to thank the governor and Randy to Will County. I know that they had a great tour of Center Point's properties and all the amenities that we have right around this vicinity. By working together, we can get things done. And a great example of that is public-private sectors getting together to solve their problems. Just as Randy has said, a year ago that we met and sat down and started to talk about how we could share in maybe the cost, share in the responsibility, share in the results. And it has taken that length of time, which, like he says, in governmental years, that was pretty short. And so anyway, but I am glad to hear that since the announcement of a budget a week ago, I want to thank our legislators that are here today that participated and worked hard and brought that together. And I said to Randy, this is the first time we can stand here and say, congratulations. He has the idea, he has the project, and he has a budget, and he has the money. And that is proven to help make what the governor has talked about as far as jobs and investments and more investments that are going to take place in the spark plug of Illinois called Will County. So Will County remains to be a great place to work, to live, and to raise a family. Years ago, 16 years ago, I participated in the signing with Governor Ryan in the results of transferring the old arsenal into the JADA organization. And Center Points was a major player in that. And so at the end of the day, this is a great time that we are now going to build a structure. We're going to build a road that is basically going to make our other roads safer. Because at the end of the day, safety on our roads is one of the most important parts of this project. Yes, creating jobs for Local 150. Yes, bringing more investment here is important also. But more important than anything is the safety on I-80, safety on I-55, safety on the local roads of Will County. And that is what this project at the end of the day is going to be for us. So I look forward to working with Mayor Odekirk, working with the governor, working with the Secretary of Transportation. We all are going to work together and do our part in order to make sure that this project is a success for our people here and residents in Will County, the businesses that are in Will County, and the investors and businesses that are going to plan to come to Will County, because we have this kind of working relationship and business approach. So with that, I thank both Governor and Randy Blankenhorn for being here today to participate in this project, and look forward to work with all of them. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Next, I'd like to bring up Bob Odekirk, Mayor of the City of Joliet. Bob.
Good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone to the City of Joliet. Thank you so much for coming out today. This is a big day locally. It's been said before, but I do want to thank a few people. John Grueling from the Will County Center of Economic Development was instrumental in this deal happening. I want to thank Larry Walsh and the Will County Board for their support. I want to thank my colleagues on the Joliet City Council and City Manager Jim Hock. I want to thank Randy Blankenhorn at IDOT, and of course I want to thank our Governor, Bruce Rauner, for his support with this project. We know what we have here in Joliet and in Will County is, I believe, the primary area of economic development in the entire state of Illinois. We've known that for some time. We also have known that the local infrastructure cannot keep up with the development that's happening here. So we reached out, as was said a year ago, we reached out with the county, with IDOT, and with the governor, saying we need help here in Joliet. We know the jobs are being created. We know the economic development that's coming into our city. We need help. And as the governor said, this was government working well. You have a $21 million investment that's leveraging basically $200 million of private investment into our area. So I've been to the local meetings with CenterPoint. I've heard the complaints from our residents. We've all heard them. And I think people in Joliet, people in Will County, and the people of the state of Illinois should know that this is government working well for them. We've heard their complaints. We're addressing what needs to be done, and we're doing so in a fiscally responsible manner. So again, Governor Rauner, thank you for your foresight and your vision in investing in Will County and in Joliet. Mr. Walsh, thank you for all your work, County Board. And again, thank you everyone for coming out today.
Thanks. We are open for questions.
Yeah, why don't you stay here with anybody questions? Yes, sir. Yeah, so we're hoping to, the studies are going to be underway right now. We're hoping to start construction next year and hoping to have construction completed end of 18, beginning of 19.
What about I-80? It's 2 lanes all the way through Joliet, all the way through the Lennox. This bridge is great for here, but what about I-80?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, I-80 is certainly in our long-term plans to widen to the east, or to the west. We've done it to the east. Until we have new revenue, it's simply going to have to stay on the back burner, but we're ready to go. We're looking at widening the bridges now so that when we're ready to build that, when we have the resources available, we'll be able to move it forward.
I'll say this on that topic. We need to invest far more in our infrastructure. That project is one in particular. We need to get a truly balanced budget, and we need some reforms to be able to attract a few more businesses here to grow the tax base so we don't have to keep raising our taxes. Once we get a balanced budget, my priority is going to be putting a very big infrastructure plan in place, both bonded as well as just part of our budgeting process every year, and put a lot more money into constructing our various transportation facilities. We can grow the Illinois economy dramatically by investing in our transportation infrastructure, and that's going to be part of it. Yes, sir.
Does it also go for the Weber 55 interchange?
Weber, yeah, we want to talk about that one?
Yeah. Again, Weber 55, we're looking at a number of interchanges along I-55 and along I-80. In this year's program, we have some engineering to start to look at what we might do and what makes sense in what order. But again, this is part of our long-range plans, is to make improvements to those interchanges.
Weber was already planned and ready to go, so
Yeah.
is this one jumping over?
No, the Weber Road project, we're still working with the county. It's still on track, and I believe that the legislation passed that gave you the authority, Larry, to do quick take on it, and we're ready to go. So.
Yeah, we did want to make this interchange a priority because to have the opportunity to leverage $170 million from the private sector dramatic, and to increase the safety, reduce the truck traffic, and get quicker access in these facilities. We're going to appeal to a lot more of America's companies who want to have their warehouses here and take advantage of these facilities now with this new bridge. Yes, sir. Yeah, I know the current plan, CenterPoint is building it, CenterPoint is going to run it. We'll talk about what joint decision making there may be, but this is their $170 million. They're very incented to make sure that a lot of traffic gets in there, and it brings much more warehouse investment, because that's where they really get their return on the capital that they put here. They put billions of dollars into these facilities here, so they're going to want to keep it, make sure it's attractive. I've got a lot of trucker friends. I know how they don't like paying tolls. So, I mean, we're going to have to keep the tolls pretty modest and make sure a lot of traffic gets driven over there.
One thing that I will add is that from a tolling perspective, we'll be working with the tollway. We want a transponder to look like the same transponder they would use on the tollway system, make sure it's all interoperable in that way. So the tollway will certainly have a role in that piece of it.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. You want to talk? What's that?
Yeah. Under existing state statute, Will County sets the toll rates, so they will negotiate that with CenterPoint, and that's where the responsibility lies, is with the County of Will.
Great. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Yeah, so I'd like to keep the questions. I'll come and meet with you off topic with you if you'd like. Just very quickly, we've asked the Illinois State Police to up the manpower and the patrols on the highways in and around Chicago, because so much of the gang violence has spilled over. People are getting away, frankly, and shooting at each other as they get on and off of these exit ramps on the highways. Our responsibility as State Patrol is for the security there, so we're upping the effort, and we're in very close coordination with Chicago Police Department on that. Yes, sir. What should talk about?
Yeah, I think the toll collection is a little bit yet to be determined. It'll be CenterPoint's responsibility, whether they want the back office, for example, to be part of the tollway's responsibility. I think that's something they'll have to work out between the two agencies. No, there'll be an intersection at Route 6. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Hi, I'm Don Schaefer, Executive Vice President of Midwest Truckers Association. We represent over 2,700 member companies in 15 states who operate in Illinois. These men and women are responsible for keeping the food in your store, the fuel at your gas station, and bringing the books to your schools. In fact, look around the house and virtually everything you see will have been moved at one time or another by a truck. That's why our issues are your issues. Whether it's the taxes they pay, the price of fuel, or the regulations truckers must endure, in the end, you, the consumer, pay the price. That's one reason why I'm proud to serve on the Illinois Channel Advisory Council. Just as truckers deliver the goods on our nation's highways, the Illinois Channel delivers the information you need on your information highway. The Illinois Channel reaches 1.4 million cable homes across the state, as well as making their programming available as a video stream on their website at illinoischannel.org. Delivering the goods is Midwest Truckers' business. Delivering the information you need to stay connected to the actions of state government, that's the Illinois Channel's business. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Springfield, we sit down with Alan Manning, author of Father Lincoln, The Untold Story of Abraham Lincoln and His Boys. Manning describes Lincoln's relationship with his children and how being a father affected his presidency. This runs about 40 minutes.
Alan Manning, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Thank you for having me.
You are the author of Father Lincoln, and a lot of people would say, another book on Lincoln? What more could be said? In fact, you note in your book, a famous historian said back in 1936, questioned whether the Lincoln theme had been exhausted back then. Why do we need another book on Abraham Lincoln?
Well, there's so much about his life that still has not been told. One of the things that I discovered to my surprise was that there had not been a full-length book on Lincoln and his relationship with his sons. Lincoln and his role as a father. There had been some articles written about it. Of course, all Lincoln biographies will touch on it, but there had not really been an in-depth study on that topic. And so I saw an opportunity to tell a story that had not yet been told.
Why does it matter how Lincoln was as a father?
I think we can always learn a lot from Abraham Lincoln, and I think that one of the stories here is that this reveals a very human side to Lincoln, a side that we don't always see. When we think of Abraham Lincoln, we tend to picture that larger-than-life figure, the great emancipator, the savior of the Union. Sometimes we forget that he was a man, and there were parts of his life that were very ordinary. And Lincoln, in his role as a father, was really one of those parts. And there's a lot of things that ordinary fathers today can relate to. He did things that most fathers do. He read bedtime stories to his kids. He helped them with their homework. I have a whole chapter in the book on when he sent his eldest son, Robert, off to college. Those are all experiences that ordinary fathers today have.
You start the book, and first I would congratulate you. It's filled with detail. In fact, so much I sometimes, as I'm reading this, would say, "How do you know that?" You know. How did you research the book? I mean, just as a quick aside, it's not just about Abraham Lincoln and how he played with his sons. So, on somewhat, I would say to the viewers, it's almost when we say Father Lincoln that it's about him as a father. It's really not just about that. You cover a lot of territory and bring in a whole lot of history. One of the, and again, it's filled with details. One of the things that I thought was funny, and I didn't know, that Lincoln had agreed to marry a woman before he had ever laid eyes upon her, which is bizarre. And then he sees her, and she's obese and missing teeth.
Right, and he felt trapped, and he wasn't sure how to get out of it, and he finally was just resigned to fulfilling a promise that he had made to marry her, and she ended up dumping him, and in a way he was mortified. He was sort of, as I think I said in the book, he was half relieved and half mortified, relieved that he was out of the obligation to marry her, but mortified at the fact that this woman would actually dump him.
Yeah, how bad am I, right?
Yeah, yeah. But no, it's...
what was it just customary? I mean, no one would think of doing that. Or is it a sign of how, was he so naive at a younger age that he would do that?
Well, he was getting into his late 20s, which at that time was a little bit old to still be unmarried.
A single guy.
And so he had a friend, a woman friend, who had, I think it was a sister, and he had met her once before, many years earlier. He didn't have a detailed recollection of her, but thought, well, she's okay. And so the sister sent for her to come on the condition that Lincoln would marry her.
And so, again, I would say to the viewers, that's one of the things that having read the book, there's so many interesting details like that you can learn little aspects of his life that we know the broad themes and chronology, perhaps, but there's still an interesting myriad of detail. And as you say, each of those kind of add like a mosaic to our understanding of him and put his actions on the world stage into some better understanding of what he was like, struggling with both as an individual as well as a public figure.
Sure, and one of the things that I tried to do in the book was to bring some context to the story as well. You asked about the research. A lot of the research that I did was on fatherhood culture in that era. What were most fathers like? Did Lincoln fall into that pattern of being a typical 19th century or early 19th century father? And so a lot of the work I did was to study what had been written and researched about fatherhood culture in that time.
What did you learn?
Well, a couple things that I think some people might be surprised of. I think that based on movies and things, we tend to have pictured fathers in the 19th century as being detached, unemotional, sort of that patriarchal type figure. And that might have been more true in the 18th century, but moving into the 19th century, into the early 1900s, there was a change going on in fatherhood culture where fathers were less patriarchal, were more willing to have emotional attachments to their kids. Some of it had to do with the fact that in many parts of the country, men were moving off of the farms and into cities. And so they were living a different kind of a lifestyle. Instead of being a farmer, they were white-collar type workers, and Lincoln was representative of that. He grew up on a farm with his father, and his father was the older style patriarch, stern disciplinarian, not emotional, not really interested in seeing Lincoln have a life outside of the farm, thought that living on the farm as a subsistence farmer was sufficient. Lincoln saw more. He saw the opportunities in urban America. That comes with some changes to fatherhood culture, because now the role of the father is not to simply get the kids out on the farm to help them subsist, but the father's job is to go off during the day, earn a living, then come back home.
And one of the things you talk about early on in the book is Lincoln's relationship with his own father, which was not good. And as you recount, he didn't do a number of things that he might have done that expose his lack of affection, Lincoln's lack of affection for his father, Thomas, right. Including when his father dies, he doesn't go to the funeral. Mm-hmm. What did you learn about that relationship, and to what extent did Lincoln take his relationship with his father and use that as a way that he structured his own parenting with his boys?
I think that most fathers learn about how to be a father from their own fathers. That's their own fathers were their primary mentors. And I think that most fathers try to take what they thought their fathers did well and repeat that, and take what they think their fathers didn't do so well and then do something different. And that was really Lincoln's experience. He, for the most part, had a very difficult relationship with his father, and I think didn't think his father was a good father. And so in his own parenting, for the most part, he tried to really do things differently. Thomas was a very stern disciplinarian. Lincoln was very lax. Thomas had put no emphasis on education. Lincoln saw to it that at least Robert and Willie got an education. Robert, of course, went on to college. Willie passed away when he was very young. But at the same time, there were some struggles where he perhaps wanted to break free, but perhaps couldn't. With Tad's education, he was a little more lax with Tad than with the other two boys, perhaps reflecting a difficulty tearing away from his own father's lack of emphasis on education. And so there are examples where he struggles a little bit. I talk a little bit in the book about favoritism. You know, one of the things that Lincoln always felt was that Thomas's favorite was Lincoln's stepbrother, John Johnston. And you know, I think it's always hurtful to a child if you think that one of your parents favors one of your other siblings. And Lincoln felt that with Johnston, and yet Lincoln. Many people said that Lincoln had a favorite child in Willie. So there were things that Robert did or things that Thomas had done that Lincoln repeated.
And let me lay the foundation that for the viewers, in case they don't know. So Lincoln and Mary, his wife, had 4 boys together. Robert, Eddie, Willie, and Ted. And of the 4, they lost 2 of them while Lincoln was living.
Right.
The first was Eddie, who passed away at the age of 4, I believe, while they were living here in Springfield.
Correct.
What impact did that? Now, back then, of course, we didn't have antibiotics, and it was not unusual for parents to lose a child,
right.
Which might have been, I wondered about, one of the reasons why men were maybe a little more detached, because it was almost expected that you were going to lose a child at some point. When Eddie died, and he was, I believe, the second, Robert was the first,
right.
What impact did that have on Lincoln and his life?
Yeah, I think this is one of the extraordinary things in this story is that what you said is true. The infant mortality rate at that time was very high, and parents were really taught in the culture coming out of the 18th century into the 19th century. The culture was to try to not grieve, to simply accept the death of a child and to move on. And the Lincolns, both of them really, were part of a changing culture that would really openly grieve at the loss of a child. And in Eddie's case, there were a couple of impacts on Lincoln. One was it was a big milestone in his faith journey. Lincoln began, after Eddie's death, to read the Bible more. He tended to invoke God's name more in his speeches. Lincoln's religion is a subject of some controversy. It's still being written on today, and there are some people who say, well, he wasn't a Christian or he was a deist. But certainly in Eddie's death, Lincoln turned to God for comfort, and really I think it was one of the first steps in a faith journey that would really continue for the rest of his life. So that was certainly one impact. The other thing was, I think it showed a resilience on Lincoln's part in that as tragic as it is to lose a child, of course, one of the things that the parents have to do is go on. And Lincoln had a responsibility to his family. He needed to continue to support them. And so despite his grieving, he had to go back to work, and he did.
In fact, I think you would say that he didn't just go back to work, but that he used work in addition to reading the Bible and considering is there a God, and he uses work as a distraction from his grief.
Right. No, there's no doubt about it. I think one of the themes that runs throughout the book is...
To join, so he uses work as a distraction from grief, and that, therefore, of course, because he worked harder at his career, elevated him further in the legal, over
Correct.
time, in the legal field, and became his reputation among the legal community, and therefore some of the more powerful and influential people in the city grew, right?
Correct, yeah, and I think one of the themes that really runs throughout the book is that it's a story about Lincoln, but it's a story about fatherhood, and it's a story about someone who has a busy career, a career that they love, and how they balance that career with their roles and responsibilities as a father. And we see that in the story of Eddie's death, of Lincoln grieving at the loss, and it was a very deep grief that he experienced, but still having to go on and continue to build his career.
Later on, of course, Lincoln's elected president, and this is where I have often wondered myself. Here, Lincoln fighting the Civil War, which would have been among the most challenging of any presidencies, with the, I guess, possible exception of maybe FDR fighting World War II in both cases, but to have that on your shoulders, and then while he is president, he loses another son, and arguably that was his favorite.
Yeah, yeah. So as you said, the oldest was Robert, then Eddie was born, and then Eddie passed away. Shortly after Eddie passed away, Mary got pregnant again, had Willie and Tad. Now, right about the time Lincoln got elected president, Robert went off to college. He went off to Harvard. So when Lincoln entered the White House, he only took Willie and Tad with him. And Willie, about a year after Lincoln became president, Willie contracted what was described at the time as bilious fever. It's really a form of typhoid, and they think he got it from playing in the swamps around Washington. And after a brief illness, he passed away. And so Lincoln had that to deal with. So he had about a year where he had the two boys in the White House, and I go into a lot of detail about their various antics around the White House, and they would barge into cabinet meetings and so forth. And then after Willie passed away, now it was just Tad with him in the White House, and really Lincoln became Tad's best friend at that point. But it is a remarkable story that he was able to have that close relationship with Tad while being president during this very tumultuous time.
And I've always just thought, how does one go on? It's hard enough when you lose a child, but to be president, and as you said earlier, he had to go on as a father. Here he had to go on as president. He didn't have time to take himself out in his grief as president and, take some time off. That wasn't an option.
Yeah, there was about a 1 or 2 week period right after Willie's death where Lincoln was very distracted. He went to the cemetery twice in the week after Willie's death and went to the vault where Willie's casket was and actually opened the vault and just gazed at Willie's body in the casket. He was very broken up about it and was distracted for about a week or so. In fact, the newspapers actually carried a couple of articles reporting on how the president is doing in the couple weeks following Willie's death.
To what extent did Lincoln's relationship and having kids, he was one of the first presidents in quite some time to have children. Was it a help or a hindrance having kids while he was trying to be president with all that he had on his plate with the Civil War?
Yeah. I think it was a help. They were certainly rambunctious, engaged in some antics, interrupted him. They got on the nerves of some of his cabinet members and some of the White House staff. And in that way, it was very different than really almost all of the presidents that had come before. Most of the presidents who had come before him, they had kids, but they were grown by the time they had entered the White House. So it was new for there to be these wild kids running around the White House. But Lincoln was really a very involved father with them, and so he made time for them. He would take time away from the office to go play with them up in the attic when they were playing up in the attic. He would not necessarily shoo them out of the cabinet meeting right away when they would come in. He tended to them. I think that may have provided a measure of relief for him as he was dealing with the nation's problems.
And we just kind of touched on this, but Lincoln as a father, as you said, his father, Thomas, was very disciplinarian, had used a belt, I believe, on Lincoln, and so Lincoln was not going to have any of that as a father. And as you write, and in fact here at the Lincoln Presidential Museum, as you go through and there are displays, one of the displays is Lincoln reading a book on a couch while his children are frolicking in the office, so they make note of that. And that happened even as he was here as a lawyer with the Herndon Law Firm or Lincoln Herndon,
Yeah.
that whether it was they would be.
They drove
just-
Herndon
just,
crazy. Yeah.
You know, playing, and he would let them go, and so he did that even when he was president.
Yeah, he
then.
did. And in fact, one story I talk about in there is he took Tad one time over to the telegraph office, which was a short walk from the White House, to get the latest dispatches from the war. And Tad got into the ink wells where they kept the ink for the pens, and got it on his fingers and smeared it all over the tables. And one of the men who was in charge of the telegraph office was appalled by this, and grabbed Tad by the collar and walked him over to Lincoln and made him show his hands. And instead of chastising Tad for making such a mess, Lincoln just said, "Come on, Tad, let's go back home. Buell's abusing you," and left. So he was a very forgiving parent as well.
When Willie died, Willie was 11 years old. Tad was just how old?
He would have been about 9.
And how did Lincoln's relationship with Tad? What was his relationship with Tad after Willie's death?
Yeah, they really became very, very close. They were close, but even closer. And part of it was for this reason. When the Lincolns first arrived at the White House, there was a couple in town that had 2 boys that were about the same age. This was Horatio Taft, who worked in the patent office. And Willie and Tad became really good friends with these 2 boys. And they did a lot of things together. Those boys would spend the night at the White House sometimes. They would even attend some of the functions. When Willie died, Mary was very upset, just as Lincoln was, and she actually told those 2 playmates that they could not attend the funeral because she said that they reminded her too much of Willie. She just didn't want to see them sitting at the funeral. It turns out Mary herself didn't go to the funeral. She was too upset to go. But after the funeral, when now it was just Tad, Mary essentially banned those 2 young boys from the White House. She just thought they reminded her too much of Willie. So Tad lost his 2 playmates. And so Lincoln really became his primary playmate. And so they tended to spend more time together. And even some of the White House staff and Lincoln's cabinet secretaries who used to complain about their antics now, in a way, felt sorry for Tad and tended to give him a pass more. I think I mentioned one time in there where Tad squirted Secretary of War Stanton with a water hose and got some of his papers wet. And if you know or read about Stanton's personality, ordinarily that would have caused quite a blow up. But instead, Stanton took it in good humor.
And I would think that Tad was some relief to Lincoln, who had all kinds of pressure, of course. And his relationship with Mary was not one that he necessarily found solace in her company. Often she was just a cause for more angst.
Sure.
She was a spendthrift and would go out and spend all kinds of money as First Lady. And as you write, money the Lincolns didn't have, and then that became an issue after his passing.
Yeah, and I think, and I do say in here that I think you can, in some ways, say that Lincoln, the time that he would like to spend with Tad, was a relief from Mary, a getaway. And in fact, one of the trips that they took together toward the end of the book was when Lincoln and Tad went down to Richmond. That was without Mary, and so they would spend a few days together, just father and son. And he would take them out to visit the troops, and he would take them on walks.
What kind of things on that topic? What things did Lincoln do with the boys over the years? Did he take them fishing? Did he play games with them? What did he do in his downtime when he was spending time with the boys?
Yeah, one of the things that I talked about, you had earlier, used the word frolic, and frolic was it's a term that's not so much used anymore, but in the 19th century was used quite frequently, and it was really referring to getting down on the floor and rolling around and playing, romping, and it was a sign of closeness between a father and their children, and Lincoln did that. He did that both in Springfield and in the White House. So he did things like that. He did play games with them. He brought them to the office, as he said, and I think that's one of the great parts of Lincoln's life as a father, is that he was able to show his children what he did at the office. So he did that. He did not take them hunting. I make the point in the book that hunting was something that never interested Lincoln. I don't think I found any evidence that he took them fishing. He might have, but I didn't mention that anywhere in the book. But he would take them sometimes on official duties, again, to review troops sometimes. He took Robert out several times. Robert, he actually sent on as a sort of an official representative of the government a couple of times. He sent him as a representative at a funeral, for example, when Robert was in college. So he involved the kids in his career some.
Now, Robert was the first, and ironically, he was the only boy to reach full manhood. Tad ends up dying after Lincoln's passing.
Right.
And what was he, about 18?
He was about 18.
And what did he die?
Without autopsies, they don't know for sure, but they think it was some type of a lung disease. There's been some recent writings that it might have been something else, some form of a cancer, but historically it's been just considered some type of a lung disease.
And on one hand, this is indirectly, the fact that only one of his four boys lived to full manhood was that there are no descendants of Abraham Lincoln still living.
That's right.
I think the last died in the mid-1980s.
Yes. Robert, who did live to adulthood, had, I believe, 2 children, but his only boy died at the age of 16. And then his daughter did live to adulthood, had a couple of kids, but those kids, I believe, did not have children. And the last one of them died, I think you said, in the 1980s.
There's some question of Lincoln's, sometimes when someone becomes a father, they have to, feel their way. They're new to the job, so to speak, and their relationship with their firstborn is different than the third or fourth one, and often they're more forgiving of the later children because they've kind of realized the error of their ways, maybe being too strict. What was Lincoln's relationship with Robert?
Yeah.
Who ended up, by the way, becoming a very successful executive, I think a railroad executive, and his mansion is still in Vermont.
Vermont, yeah. First, I will say that there's somewhat less information out there on Robert's younger years, and in part it's because, of course, Lincoln wasn't famous when Robert was young, and so there's fewer observations of Lincoln and Robert. Also, when Robert was young, is when Lincoln tended to be away from home quite a bit. He was out riding the circuit, as many lawyers did back then. And so Robert probably saw less of Lincoln than the younger boys did. But I try to make the argument in the book that they still had a very close relationship, and I document the times that they were together, the things that Lincoln did to help Robert in school. As I mentioned, the chapter on him sending him off to college, and it was not the case where he just simply sent Robert off and that was it. He went and visited him on the East Coast just before he ran for president, and they had several days together, and they traveled around and spent a lot of time in Robert's room talking. They went to church together, and so I think a lot of people have concluded that Lincoln and Robert didn't have a close relationship, but I really try to show otherwise. And part of that conclusion that others have had is based on some of Robert's own words. He wrote one time when he was asked for some information on Lincoln's personal life that, well, you know, right about the time he became president, I went off to college, and I hardly spent 10 minutes with him after that. And that was demonstrably false, that he had only spent a short amount of time with Lincoln while he was off at college. He used to come home for Christmas break. As I mentioned, Lincoln went and visited him shortly before he became president. He consulted with Robert on matters of the war. Robert would send in requests for a friend would like this appointment or that appointment. They had a lot of communication with each other. There was the whole question of whether Robert should join the Army, and Lincoln and Mary at first didn't want him to because they'd already lost 2 boys at that time. Eventually, Lincoln allowed him to join, arranged for him to be on Grant's staff. And so there's really a lot of information out there, particularly in the later years, where Lincoln and Robert, I think, were very close.
In the, you know, I wonder, I don't know if you have this as maybe reaching to ask you something that you may not know, but is there any indication to say, because on one hand, what I'm getting at is how did Lincoln, being a father, influence his presidency? Now, here he's fighting the Civil War, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands and thousands on a regular basis of young men who were Robert's age, were dying, and here Lincoln knew the grief of losing sons.
Right.
Did that have any bearing on him? Did it add to his woes and his emotional burden that he had to carry as president, and make him certainly not less? I would have thought it would not make him less caring about those losses, but more.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely it did. I think that having lost 2 boys already made him keenly aware of the pain that would be suffered by the families of the soldiers who were fighting. I don't think there's any question about that. And also the struggle that he had with Robert and whether Robert should join the Army. You know, it actually kind of highlighted, I think, a dilemma for Lincoln, because on the one hand he was sending these other boys off to battle, and many thought he was at the same time trying to protect his son, and in a way it became a political issue for him. Now eventually he let Robert go, although he went off to a fairly safe part of the war. But
he was trying to protect him, that wasn't
there's no question he was trying to protect him, and he was doing that, I think, perhaps some for himself, but largely Mary was really adamant that he not go. But as it became clear that the war was coming to an end in late 1864, Lincoln finally gave in and let Robert go. And another factor in that was Robert had started law school. He graduated from Harvard, and he said, since you won't let me join the Army, I guess I'll go ahead and start law school. And he hated law school and found it very boring. And so I think that there may have been a conversation over his Christmas break in late 1864 with his father where he finally convinced his father to let him go. But it was a difficult decision for Lincoln, having already lost the 2 boys.
Let's talk a little bit about putting on the book before we close out, because one of the things, as I noted, that I found interesting was just the level of detail. How long did it take you to write the book? How much time did you spend on researching, and where do you find all this detail? The little intricacies I mean, I can imagine you finding the headline knowledge.
Right.
It's the level of detail within the book that surprised me.
Well, I was practicing law at the time I wrote the book full-time, so I was working on it really part-time in my spare time, and I would say I wrote maybe 80% of it over 2.5 year period, and that included doing the research. I then put it aside for a while and finished it up a couple years later. I spent time here at the Lincoln Library here in Springfield going through some papers, things that had never been published before. One of the, I think, neat things that I found were some letters that were written by Lincoln's neighbors in Springfield, not letters to the Lincolns, but letters to other family members that contained observations on the Lincoln family, and that gave a real insight into the lives of the Lincoln family while they were back here in Springfield. I went through, of course, Lincoln's own papers, letters, many of which have been published. I went through letters, diaries of people close to Lincoln, his cabinet members, looking for observations that they had on Lincoln as a father. Newspapers that were relevant at the time, some of which, particularly when he was president, would occasionally contain references to the kids and things that the kids were doing. But it also helped me place Lincoln. I was able to chronicle how much was he away from home, how much time was he home, the trip from Springfield to Washington, D.C., which Robert accompanied him on. All of that stuff, a lot of that can be found in newspapers of the time. I found things in libraries and archives really all over the country. And one of the great things today with the internet is that if there's a letter in an obscure library somewhere, I don't necessarily have to go there. I can email them, they can copy it for me and send it to me. So that was a big help.
Is there a source of documents out there that you can look through to then contact a library and say, hey, I want to see that letter? Yeah,
I might find a reference to that letter in someone else's work. And I acknowledge in the book, I think one of the extraordinary things about Lincoln, since so much has been written on him, I think for a biographer writing a new book, we owe a debt of gratitude to those who have come before us because they have done so much of the work uncovering a lot of these sources. And so I would often find references to sources in other books and then try to locate them myself. And so, yeah, Lincoln stuff is all over the place, but it was certainly a pleasure to be looking for it and finding it.
And lastly, you were motivated to write the book. You had some impressions of, obviously we all have impressions of Abraham Lincoln. To what extent did your writing this book change any of your perceptions of who Lincoln was?
Yeah. I think there are a couple things. One was I feel like I dispelled this notion that Lincoln wasn't close to Robert. I think that has been a fairly common theme throughout general biographies on Lincoln, and I think I show a different side of that. I also think that it reveals this very human side of this man that, again, we tend to think of as a larger-than-life figure, and I think it's important for us to see that. And then, in a larger sense, what I tried to do was write it in such a way that a father reading the book can have a takeaway from it. You know, okay, Lincoln was this way as a father. What can I learn from that? Maybe how can I be a better father? And I think that Lincoln, in a lot of ways, was at his best as a father when he was combining his career with his fatherhood, when he would take the kids to the office with him or discuss what he did at the office with them. You know, I think as fathers, sometimes we want to put a wall up between our careers and our fatherhood. We come home at the end of the day, we're tired, we don't necessarily want to talk about what we did at the office, but our kids need to know what we do. They need to know what our careers are all about. And I think that Lincoln, in sharing his career with his kids, that really made him a better father, and I think that's something we can all learn from.
All right, well, Alan Manning, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us, and the book is Father Lincoln. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dan Montgomery, President of the Illinois Federation of Teachers. More than 100,000 IFT members work each day in schools, universities, colleges, and state agencies across Illinois. They're professionals who teach our students, keep our public buildings safe and clean, and provide critical state services, and much more. As an advocate for our members, their professions, and those we serve, the IFT works in Springfield to support legislative policies that promote high-quality schools and public services. We also fight to protect collective bargaining rights for all our members and all working men and women. We do this through an organized program of advocacy and year-round monitoring of public policy proposals. And that's why the IFT is proud to support the work of the Illinois Channel, whose coverage connects us to legislative debates and committee hearings, as well as interviews with leaders on key issues like the state budget, tax policy, public pensions, and education funding. Funding education is one of the primary responsibilities of Illinois state government, so we should all pay attention to the policies being proposed and how they may help or harm our children's futures. You know, what's happening in the State House today directly impacts what happens in classrooms tomorrow, and what happens in classrooms impacts the future of our state and our nation for decades to come. I'm Dan Montgomery, President of the Illinois Federation of Teachers, and I'm proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Education Advisory Board. The Illinois Channel, it keeps us all connected.
Next, from Springfield, we head to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, where former U.S. Senator Adlai Stevenson discusses his book, The Black Book, American Politics and History as Experienced by 5 Generations of an American Family, as well as U.S. and Illinois politics. This runs about 50 minutes.
I can't resist reminding you that I still have not conceded that election in 1982. We lost by 1 vote our effort to get a recount, and anyway, that's what happened. I am very grateful to Mark for his kind words, and to all of his colleagues for the warm welcome back here to the Library and Museum, and to this great institution. Grateful also because I'm giving the library a large collection of memorabilia, political memorabilia of my family's, which goes back to Jesse Fell. And we're here. I've also given these copies of the Black Book. So proceeds from its sale go to, not me, they go to the library and the museum, and indirectly the support of this project for maintenance and eventually public display of this really unusual collection of political memorabilia. The Black Book recalls American politics, culture, and history as my family knew it over 5 generations. It's named for a binder started by great-great-grandfather Adlai I, as Mark mentioned, Vice President of the United States, among other things. He stuffed it with aphorisms, jokes, bits of wit and wisdom. And this binder became known as the Black Book, and it expanded over the generations as each added more and more material to the Black Book, cataloged it, indexed it, became a ready source of material for our speeches. It did more for my father and my grandfather than for me. Some of you may remember Mike Royko of the old Chicago Sun-Times. He remarked that my speeches made the blood run tepid. He said I had all the oratorical fire of an algebra teacher. So the Black Book helped only so much. My Black Book, recently published by, or in China, by the eminent Chinese Academy of Social Studies Press, contrasts values which made America great and values which undermine it today. It records lessons from a rich American past, and quoting both Confucius and Churchill, explains that to see the future, you must see the past. The Black Book begins with Lincoln and ends in China, with an epilogue on the life cycle of nations and empires. China, a civilization as well as a state, is on the rise. Soon it will have the world's largest economy. Lincoln employed anecdote, humor, and story in his speeches. He observed, and I'm quoting, "They say I tell a great many stories. I reckon I do. But I have found in the course of a long experience that common people, take them as they run, are more easily informed through the medium of a broad illustration than in any other way. And as to what the hypercritical few may say, I don't care." Lincoln may have inspired Adlai I to do likewise. Stories, humor could make the point, engage the audience. The Black Book is rich in humor. It enlivened the discourse then, and it's scarce in our politics now. Great-great-grandfather Jesse Fell proposed the Lincoln-Douglas debates, 7 debates of 4 hours each focused on one subject, slavery in the territories. People traveled by foot, by horseback, and by wagon, and by the thousands to be a part of their politics. When the debates brought Lincoln to the nation's attention, Fell then persuaded him to run for president. And Lincoln gave Fell his autobiographical sketch, which Fell used to promote Lincoln's candidacy. This letter to Fell sketched Lincoln's humble origins. It began, and I'm quoting, "There is not much of it, for the reason, I suppose, that there is not much of me." This letter, this sublime letter, is recorded in the Black Book and depicts another time and man. We've gone from Abraham Lincoln to Donald Trump. Fell was the exemplary American citizen for whom service to country and community was a welcome duty. He founded what is now Illinois State University and published the Bloomington Daily Panagraph. He made money and gave it all back to his community, asking nothing. As secretary of the infant Republican Party, he was charged by its state convention with organizing Illinois' delegation to the 1860 Republican National Convention for Lincoln. Without Fell, the citizen, there might never have been Lincoln, the president. A paradox develops in the Black Book. The great presidents in modern history were nominated by party conventions, which also debated transcendent issues. Party organization had a purpose which transcended power. Party leaders, with knowledge of the issues, the candidates, and demands of public office, nominated candidates for president, senator, and governor. In earlier days, the laboring classes, many of them immigrants, piled into America's slums, where their refuge was the settlement house, the church, or perhaps the Democratic political organization. In a Chicago Irish ward, a little boy's prayer began, "Our Father, who art in heaven, O hallowed be thy name." O'Halloran was the Democratic ward committeeman. The Democratic organization was a route to the middle class for some. Today, party organizations have little purpose except to raise money and host conventions, which are media events. Today's mainstream media trivializes the dialogue. According to some fact-checking organizations, about 70% of Donald Trump's statements are false. Remember Governor O'Malley? He was a contender for the nomination early in this process. He was ranked first for truth, so Trump wins. He gets the media attention. Money could always buy influence. In the Black Book, money is a subject of some discomfort and sensitivity. Now in our politics, it's a measure of political viability. Polls of public opinion, uninformed by discourse, and the new mass media followed. With roots in the Gilded Age and in Illinois, no Stevenson is unfamiliar with the underside of American politics. But in the Black Book, America experienced great bursts of political energy and idealism. The Gilded Age was followed by populists, progressives, and muckrakers, by Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. The 20s was followed by Depression and the New Deal. In 1948, I was a 17-year-old sergeant at arms at the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. I was stationed beneath the rostrum. That was security in those days. 17-year-old sergeant at arms. When an unknown mayor of Minneapolis and candidate for the Senate was recognized, Hubert Humphrey, many years later my junior Senate seatmate, challenged those politicians assembled in that hot, sweaty, smoke-filled room to do their duty, adopt a strong civil rights plank, and they did, driving much of the South out of the party. It was a hopeless year for the Democrats. They had the presidency since 1933. Back in Illinois, the party leaders gathered behind closed doors to slate a New Deal bureaucrat, an architect of the United Nations, an assistant secretary of the Navy and diplomat in the Truman and Roosevelt administrations for governor. That was my father. For the Senate, they slated an eminent professor of economics at the University of Chicago and Marine Corps veteran of the War in the Pacific, Paul H. Douglas. I was the driver, day in and out. We campaigned at factory gates, county fairs, county squares, ward meetings at night, pressing the flesh, condemning a corrupt Green administration in Springfield and the do-nothing Congress in Washington, exhorting the faithful to get everyone registered and out to vote the straight Democratic ticket. The Gov won by the largest margin in Illinois history to that time, carrying Harry Truman to a narrow victory in the country. His campaign cost $157,000. I remember no fundraisers. And without the straight Democratic ticket, Thomas Dewey would probably have been elected President of the United States. The Gov, as Adlai II was known to friends, recruited professionals to state government. They didn't pay to play, they sacrificed to serve. The Gov shut down gambling across the state. He reformed state government. The legislature went along. Of course, it helped because it helped. The Gov had 30,000 Republican employees to replace with good Democrats. That helped him in the legislature. One of these new state employees, Democrat, observed to my father that he had been a lifelong Democrat ever since he got his state job. The Gov remarked that cleanliness was next to godliness, except in the Illinois legislature where it was next to impossible. Thanked for his support for a tax increase for highways, then Representative Paul Powell, who I assume you all remember, Paul Powell of shoebox fame, he replied to the Gov, my father thanked him for his support, and he replied, I'm sure glad to have your thanks, Governor, because it cost me $50,000. Paul Powell was the nemesis of 2 generations. Asked for a comment after his death, I responded, his shoeboxes will be hard to fill. Adlai won as First Assistant Postmaster General in Grover Cleveland's first administration, replaced 40,000 Republicans with good Democrats, for which public service he was rewarded by his grateful party with its nomination for vice president with Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland was a reformer. In 1952, the Gov was drafted for president by the Democratic National Convention in Chicago after a brilliant welcoming address. He entered no primaries. They were formalities well into my time. He started that campaign at the convention with no staff, no program or money, and went on to electrify the world. In the Black Book, the purpose of campaigns is not alone to win power, it is to inform the people so they can make sound decisions. Trust the people with the truth, all the truth, the Gov said. What wins is more important than who wins. The fairness doctrine prevailed. The public's airwaves were used to inform, not to exploit. He, in 18 half-hour blocks of time on national television, he made eloquent, substantive speeches to cheering partisans. As the presidential candidate in 1952 and 1956, and as titular leader of the Democratic Party during the Eisenhower interregnum, he laid the foundations for the new frontier and great society and began the strategic arms control process. The opposition did more than oppose. The late Arthur Schlesinger dubbed John F. Kennedy executor of the Stevenson Revolution. Democracy is fragile, its road to autocracy and war well-traveled, conditioned by centuries of dynastic and ecclesiastical wars. The founders put up a wall between church and state. Reason would reign in man's temporal domain, God in his spiritual domain. They created a representative form of democracy, over time made more direct. Hamilton warned of war fevers in the human breast. They created a system of checks and balances. Wars would be declared by Congress. But it took little more than a fictitious attack in the Bay of Tonkin, a fictitious attack in Havana Harbor, or fictitious weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to excite the fevers and take the country to war. Rare is the Congressman Abraham Lincoln who demands evidence of the casus belli. As the Black Book explains, it's easier to make war than to make peace. I warned of terrorism when I was in the Senate, tried to prevent it, and paid the price. The Gov was a peacemaker. I remember very little partisanship in the Illinois House of Representatives, which I entered in 1963. I remember no partisanship in the United States Senate. I entered in 1970. The center was broad, reason still reigned, and wise men too. In the Senate, we crossed the aisle to support environmental protection legislation, consumer product safety legislation, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and many more. Republican President Nixon imposed wage and price controls. Senators tried to support their president regardless of party. But the 70s was a transitional decade. Money and electronic media, Watergate and Vietnam converged. The democratic dialogue dried up, reforms followed, and the paradox. Some reforms were sound, like campaign financial disclosure and spending limits. I was made chairman of the Senate's first ethics committee with an elaborate code of ethics to enforce. In those days, the mere pendency of an ethics committee investigation terminated your career. But some forms unraveled and some had unintended consequences. We reformers opened the doors to let in the sunshine and let in the lobbyists and money. It never stopped flowing. Legislators stopped legislating. Now they delegate responsibility to staff, which joins with the leadership to draft omnibus bills in the House, which members have no chance to read or amend before they vote on them. They spend much of their time dialing for dollars. They buy committee assignments from the leadership with money. As we reform politics, usually in the name of democracy, we made it less democratic and accountable in some respects. The founders closed the doors at the 1787 Constitutional Convention, as we had when it came to writing legislation to represent the public interest in the Senate before we pried them open. It's often easier to represent the public interest in secret. The founders closed the doors to the convention and went one step farther. They pledged all the delegates to secrecy. In the 80s, ideologues began arriving in Washington, even as ideologues were leaving Beijing. A familiar social Darwinian trickle-down economics returned, and the magic of the marketplace. Funding for civil research, education, and job training were cut. Resources shifted to the military. The budget began its descent into deficit. The Tea Party would follow. Recent history is all too familiar. President Obama inherited a budget plunging into deficit at the fastest rate in history, and 2 wars. Now the Congress is dysfunctional. The Supreme Court of the United States is threatened by deadlock. The money flows into lobbying, campaign contributions, super PACs, and consultants. By no coincidence, income inequality is the greatest since 1928 and mounting. An estimated 256 families own as much as the entire bottom half of America. The complexities of governing mount in a dynamic, interdependent nuclear world as our competencies decline. All levels of government are affected. Springfield is paralyzed. And the public is rightly concerned. Senator Sanders has tapped into the discontent, but some Americans are wrongly disposed to support those least qualified by temperament and experience, little heeding the history the lessons of history. Our politics lost its balance. But if the Black Book is any guide, it can be restored. American politics reformed. Americans respond to challenge, but they need an agenda for renewal and reform, a response. The Adlai Stevenson Center on Democracy conducted a program on political reform recently which underscored the need to restore the regular order to Congress and reform campaign finance. Partial public financing is but one means. Other countries do a far better job of informing their publics. Indeed, some try with the English language program to inform the American public. The Fairness Doctrine could be reestablished. The Federal Communications Act could be enforced. Most developed democracies generously support public media. Public broadcasting needs more funding. The public's airways should be used again for its benefit, not its exploitation. Our ballots are so long they leave the voter bewildered by unfamiliar candidates for unfamiliar offices. The U.S. is the only country in the world which elects judges except Bolivia. Do we need to elect an official to distribute license plates? Illinois has more units of local government than any other state. As state treasurer, I testified before the Illinois Constitutional Convention in favor of abolishing my office and combining it with the comptroller. The treasurer's office was an old-fashioned patronage office. I loved it. I could hire and fire at will and quadruple the earnings on the investment of state funds while cutting the budget every year. But do we need all these elected state officials and more units of local government than any other state? More fundamentally, we need to reform the system for the selection of presidential candidates. Party primaries and caucuses could be required to be held on one of 3 dates in June, July, and August. Campaigns could be shortened, costs reduced, candidates forced to address a national constituency. Senior public and party officials, I think, should be ex officio delegates, restoring responsibility for those qualified to exercise it. I think also that only registered Democrats and Republicans should vote in their respective primaries to choose their candidates. We could respond again, as in the past, and emerge stronger in a world that needs American leadership. Our politics is challenged, but challenge is opportunity in the Black Book. Americans respond. They never lose faith nor confidence in the future, but they need an agenda for reform, and that is why I have written the Black Book, and we have organized the Adlai Stevenson Center on Democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. You've given us a lot to think about. I'm sure it's stimulated plenty of questions in the audience as well, but since I'm sitting here, I can take the honor of having the first couple questions. And I thought I'd start by, since we've got Father's Day coming up in just a few days, if you would reflect a little bit on what it was like to be born into such a long and distinguished family and what it was like to be the son of Adlai II.
Well, I was born with an incurable hereditary case of politics. And from my earliest memory, I was set on a political career. And very fortunate to have had a father who was universally respected and something of an inspiration to me. I felt somewhat disadvantaged. I didn't want to be accused of taking advantage of my name, so I was determined to start at the bottom and had that wonderful opportunity to run for state representative and win a best legislator, where try to start at the bottom and move up. But politics, like to some extent farming and journalism, it seems to be in the bloodstream.
Do you have any particular memories from a very young age of your relationship with your father?
No, you know, I have many memories, of course, but we were always on the move. He was in Washington, in London, in New York, a peripatetic student of the world, constantly traveling, and learning about the past from monuments and about how people lived from their slums, and as well as in the ministries. And I tried to follow, sometimes went with him. But our home in Libertyville became kind of a base where we would meet occasionally. And then business was usually, conversation was usually taken up with family matters. So I never really discussed politics with him, except I do remember him to suggest that I do what I didn't do. He said, come at a high level, and I wanted to start at the bottom level. He said, and this is good advice, you know, get a career so to fall back on in the lean years, and the law was obvious because it trained for many disciplines, including politics. He was an example, you know. He was not a lecturer. He used to read to us at night from Kipling and Walter Scott, but we were always sort of moving around and have a lot of time together.
One other question here for you, Senator. I'm probably not alone in the audience of people who have very recently watched this first political debate that was televised. At least that's how it's being advertised. The 1956 debate that your father had with Estes Kefauver.
Yeah.
And that was leading into, in the midst of the primary season. And one of the comments that was made, I mean, much of your discussion tonight has been about how politics has changed. And if there's a theme here, it hasn't necessarily changed for the better over the last 50-some years. One of the comments that your father made was a little bit of regret about the role that television now was going to be playing in the future and how expensive that was going to be. So my question here, after having set that up, I guess, is now we're in the age where it seems like television is definitely the main medium, but it's increasingly social media as well that is playing a role. And I wonder if you could reflect on that, whether or not that's a good trend.
Well, as I mentioned, television can be very useful, very constructive. He was able, because fairness doctrine, it was actually the National Committee, to get those 18 regularly scheduled half-hour blocks of time on national television for $1 million. That was a wonderful opportunity for him to lay out his program to the American people. But that's past. Now, you know, television either gravitates to the Trump types, the colorful, sometimes irresponsible types, leaving the O'Malleys aside. And the other way to get television is money, and television is the main source of information for voters, and that, of course, is expensive, and the money comes with people who are investing it. They require something in exchange. So I'm not quite sure I remember what your question is now, but one of the points I tried to emphasize is we need to go back to the old days and make television a positive source of information for people. Make sure that candidates for high office have access to it. Now, social media is, I don't even know what it is exactly. I'm so old-fashioned. That's going to be much more difficult to regulate, or to, anybody can connect now with anybody in the world. And I suppose the answer is you just have to try to, excel, whether it's by social media or public television, with your ideas, your experience, your, eloquence. Social media could be a positive influence, but it's a kind of a mixed bag, it seems to me. Maybe you should answer some of these questions.
I'm afraid I'm too old for the social media trend. It's the younger generation now that is really connecting that way, and it's a mystery, but certainly the last couple presidential cycles that it seems like the Democrats figured it out, and the Republicans are now working on that as well. So, Sabrina, I don't know, are we going to pass around the mics here? Yeah, I think we can. Okay. And we have one way in the back here to start with. And I would ask that you wait until you have the mic so that everybody can hear and understand the question.
Hello, Senator Stevenson. We're Bloomingtonians. We're from Bloomington, Illinois. And in Bloomington, the Stevenson family has been held in very high regard. I'm in my 50s. I don't remember any time when the Stevenson family was not somebody that you wanted to know and very influential in the history of Bloomington, Illinois. And I've long wondered and never imagined that I'd have a chance to ask one of the Stevensons. When I was a young girl and didn't know anything, I was 18, Bunny was often in the Stevenson room at Stevenson Hall. But I was quite intimidated by her at that time, so it didn't occur to me to ask. But I wondered, how would you see the difference in the way that presidential politics were practiced during your great-grandfather's period of time versus how the nomination process is accomplished today? Because it seems to me when I read about it, it must have been more like Lincoln, where he sat at home and then he was told. I don't know, so I'm wondering about how your great-grandfather, what he recollected or what your family, learned about it from then.
Well, as I mentioned, primaries and caucuses were, well, for the early part, they didn't exist. Primaries were formalities well into, my time. I can't. Party organizations selected candidates. I think all the great presidents, certainly of the modern era, let's not go all the way back to the founders, were selected by party, organizations. My father, in that 52 campaign, he didn't enter any primaries. He was nominated by the convention. In 56, he entered 5 primaries. One of them, incidentally, was in Minnesota. And this is why I said I think that voters in primaries should be registered Democrats or Republicans. The Republicans poured into the Democratic primary because there was no Republican contest back. This was Eisenhower was president. They poured into the Democratic primary to elect Estes Kefauver because he was the weakest Democratic candidate. So, I don't have all the answers, but you're really touching on what I'm getting at. I think we really need to, and the Stevenson Center is starting to focus on, get an agenda for reform after this election. Politics is awfully hard to predict, but I cannot conceive of Trump getting elected president. Now, if Hillary Clinton gets elected, there's going to be a moment there, which we really shouldn't let get away from us, to act on an agenda for reform. You'd think the Republicans, after what they've been through, might be ready for a different system. How you do it all, I don't know. There are a lot of lessons in the past. And I suggested a few ideas, like insisting that all primaries or caucuses be on just one of 3 dates and start late in June. We've got to shorten these elections. That would also tend to, I think, force candidates to focus on national issues. Now, if you go to Iowa, you've got to support ethanol. You know, you've got to support local issues, and the campaigns are endless. Financing is, of course, a big problem that everybody talks about, and maybe the Supreme Court could be persuaded to re-examine the Citizens United case. It left the door open a crack in view of subsequent history. So, you know, if I understand your question, it's the question I'm raising too, and beginning to try to answer by throwing out illustrations of that are based in part on historical experience, but without some history to guide us, as in the case of social media. I'm absolutely confident it could be done, and if, and maybe even the parties come together on a reformed system for the nomination of presidential candidates. You know, the problem issues don't stop at the federal level here. Look at Illinois. Why do we need so many elected officials? I think people have these long ballots. I try to be a conscientious citizen, but I often don't know who to vote for. I mean, it has to be a Democrat, but so it's a very good question for which I don't have all the answers by any means.
We have another question. Yes, sir, right here. And it'll be just a second we get the mic to you.
They gave me one and it works.
Oh, one over here. You're next, and then this gentleman here in the center.
Senator Stevenson, I may be the odd duck in the room, but you've sort of expressed your views on Donald Trump. I'd be very curious to your views on Hillary Clinton as the next president.
Well, she's had an enormous amount of experience, and that cannot be said for Donald Trump. That's one of my problems with Trump. He's had no experience, I mean, relevant to experience. She is highly civilized, highly intelligent, and my concerns are, frankly, that she's just a little too hawkish to my liking. She supported the war in Iraq. She seems to be, I think, she's not necessarily good, but I think she's flexible and quite capable, and is beginning to demonstrate that, capable of, you know, changing positions, reacting to realities. But as between, you know, the Clintons were the first, her husband was the first Democratic president of the new era, the era of money and tactics. The first in modern history without a New Deal, a fair deal, a new America of Adlai Stevenson. She is a product of this new environment, and I think she could be a good president. It's a little hard for me to envision her being a, you know, real reformer, but she's certainly capable of changing her mind and of learning, and she has had an enormous amount of experience. You see a little change coming. I think Bernie Sanders is having a little effect on some of her views. So I think she's got potential, but there is a history there that makes me a little concerned about her hawkishness. That's reflecting my own bias. And as you can see, or maybe in the book, It's a lot easier to wage war than to wage peace. My father was a peacemaker, and that's what we need, the world needs. It's a world that's looking to the United States for leadership. I'd like to see more cooperation between the world's largest military power and the world's largest economic power, which will soon be China. Together, they could be a very constructive influence in the world. I wouldn't rule that out, having just returned from China.
Right here, sir.
Senator, let me take you back a little bit. Jesse Fell was one of the premier Republicans, and you're one of the premier Democrats. When did the family switch, and why?
Jesse Fell was our first and last Republican. And I'm quite confident that if he were here today, he would not be supporting Donald Trump. He's a great man. Extraordinary. And overlooked by history because he never asked for anything. Quaker.
We have one way in the back corner here.
How did you and the first Mayor Daley get along in general? And was he more of a help or a hindrance to any of your election endeavors?
The first Mayor Daley, is that what you said? Yeah. He was a help. He had served in my father's cabinet, so I'd known him for a long time. Never asked anything remotely improper. He had two offices later after he became mayor, one in City Hall and another across the street in a hotel. And if you were discussing city business, you met in his city office. But if it was political business, no. You met at the office in the hotel. He called me from time to time. And I think, this is, my father had incidentally supported him in a contested election for mayor against an incumbent Mayor Kennelly. That was very unusual, and I think, in politics, you become indebted and you repay your debts. I think he was indebted to my father. But, and maybe helping me was a way of paying a debt to my father. On the other hand, he was very pragmatic. And I think, the Republicans in that election of 1960, was it 3 for the House of Representatives, the bedsheet ballot at-large election, they were leading their slate of 118 candidates with Earl Eisenhower. Can you hear Richard J. Daley thinking? He called me and asked me to run. He wanted to balance an Eisenhower with a Stevenson. And guess what? We finally beat an Eisenhower.
Senator, I think that at this time we need to get you out so you can sign some more books. I'm sure there are people who are eager to do that, and I know there will be folks who want to talk to you one-on-one about it, but it's been enlightening. It's been a pleasure to have you here this evening.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Hi, I'm Tony Pulowski, Executive Director for the ARC of Illinois. We fight for the rights and needs for 220,000 infants, children, and adults with intellectual and other developmental disabilities and their families. With a bit of support, people with developmental disabilities can live a full life in the community. This is accomplished in a variety of ways, such as being included in their neighborhood schools alongside their non-disabled friends, being supported to live in their own homes instead of being locked away in institutions. Diversity makes our community better. And the good news, doing the right thing, investing in community supports, also saves taxpayers money. In fact, it costs taxpayers about half as much to support people with disabilities in community homes where they're better cared for than it costs to have them housed in institutions. Advancing positive public policy by supporting the development of community services best serves the needs of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is our greatest goal, developing inclusive communities so everyone can live a full life in the community. That's why I'm so proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. At its core, politics is about people and their needs, and the Illinois Channel's coverage of our issues allow us to tell the story of people with disabilities and their families, not in a quick soundbite, but in full, unedited interview in which our parents can tell their story, what they want for their child with a disability, and why they were concerned about what the state was doing. Isn't that the kind of coverage we all want of politics? Coverage that ties us to the issues that really matter and in a way that doesn't shortchange the ability of those impacted to get their message out. I'm Tony Pulowski, Executive Director of the ARC of Illinois and a proud member of the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel, it keeps us connected to the issues that matter the most.